Hello everybody, welcome to Dirty Air. I'm your host Alex Lambert, and we have a packed show today after NASCAR in Atlanta, the second race this year at Atlanta, the second race of this new configuration, this pack racing style race at Atlanta, the second one we got today. And this is really, I want to jump right on into this about the weather. This is really the first race that in the recent, few years of NASCAR, you can visually see the handling difference from hot temperatures to cold temperatures, and I think that's really interesting. I talk about it a lot when we go from day to night races, but you can never really totally see it. You know it's there, and you know it does change the grip of the race cars and the handling, but you can't really see it on TV, and it's not very obvious. Today it was very obvious. If you go back and watch the race in March, in the wintertime, or I think it was like the first day of spring, early March or late March, that we run the first race at Atlanta, you can tell and look at the two and tell there's a difference in the handling. The cars are way looser today on the slicker track conditions, the hotter track conditions, and it could have been even hotter if there wasn't cloud cover. It was actually a fairly cool day in Atlanta. It was in the mid to high 80s today. Typically, it can be close to 100 in the summertime at Atlanta. Typically, that is a possibility. So fortunately for the drivers in this case, they did have a little bit more grip than they would have if the temperatures were higher and if there wasn't as much cloud cover as it was. But I definitely think that needs to be addressed because it is kind of rare, and it was cool to see the difference, the difference in the two races, and it's fun to compare those two. So let's talk about it. Let's get on into it. I'm going to start out by talking about your winner, Chase Elliott, the hometown boy in the state of Georgia. He obviously grew up in the state of Georgia. That's where he's from. That's where Bill's from. So there are now two Georgia natives that have won at the only track in Georgia, Atlanta Speedway, and those are both Elliott's. Bill Elliott, and then a few decades later, Chase Elliott comes along and gets that win today at Atlanta. So that's a cool story to see. Obviously, I'm a Kyle fan, so I'm not the biggest Chase Elliott fan, but there are moments that are pretty cool to see. It's cool to see the fans cheering. Not the best crowd today at Atlanta Speedway, but definitely a big crowd was still at the track, and they were a very vocal crowd. When Chase Elliott would take the lead, NBC, I guess they have microphones in the stands or something. You can hear the fans cheer, which is exciting and cool to see. So it was a cool moment to see for sure. And then you had the pool room. I don't know what they had going on over there, ringing the siren and all that. So it was pretty cool to see Chase Elliott win the race. Now, I have heard a few things on Twitter, and then of course they talked about it in the post-race show. Chase Elliott's move on Corey LaJoie at the end of this race. Chase Elliott basically just turned up the racetrack, pulled a complete block on Corey LaJoie, eventually causing Corey LaJoie to get loose, get up in the wall, and ultimately spin around, ending his day. I believe he finished 19th or 20th, 21st maybe, somewhere in that range. So not the best day ending out for Corey LaJoie, but at least he was able to run up front, which is not very common for that team, not very common for that smaller team to be competing for a win, week in and week out. That does not happen weekly for the 7 teams. So it was cool to see him run up front. A great personality for NASCAR, LaJoie is. And they talked to him in his interview. He kind of explained that's kind of how this racing goes. I tried to make the best move, what I thought was the right move. And unfortunately, with the way the circumstances played out, that didn't happen. Having the lead, having the clean air definitely did play somewhat of a important role in this race. You heard drivers like Ross Chastain explain that early on at the start of the race, that they wanted to have the lead going to the finish, which is interesting. But if you look at the move Chase Elliott made, I want to go back to the move. You have to do that. Did you want Chase Elliott to stay down low and allow LaJoie to pass him, and then of course ultimately Elliott ends up losing the race because of that move? That's not what you do at the end of this racing. That's not how you handle the racing. So I think the move by Chase Elliott, remember, this is coming from somebody who does not really pull for Chase Elliott weekly. I'm a Kyle Busch fan, but the move he made was just a fair move. That's how you have to run these plate races. Now, if he'd have done that move on lap 10 of the race or lap 100 instead of the last lap, we'd be talking about something completely different. But coming to the win at a super speedway or pack racing type of race, you have to pull on blocks every now and then, and that's what he did, and Chase Elliott did it at the right time. He didn't touch LaJoie. He didn't wreck himself or really wreck LaJoie at all. LaJoie kind of lost it himself, which is due to the blocking, of course. But I think the move was what you had to do if you're Chase Elliott. And then, of course, NASCAR threw the caution right after that. They threw it kind of quick. That was one of those cautions where they might could have raced back to the line, and it would have been a race at that point between Chase Elliott and Ross Chastain. But NASCAR kind of hit the button really quick there to give Chase Elliott the lead. Not saying they gave it to him, but definitely the caution came out very quick there for Chase Elliott. But he had the fastest car all day long. I do want to talk about the good cars in this race. I'll get to Chastain, obviously, and all the controversy that he had in just a second. But a lot of good cars we saw running in this race. But overall, I think the best car that we saw was definitely the 9 car. And this is something that maybe Talladega and maybe Daytona have lacked over the last few years, but Atlanta has it, at least in this race. You could see what cars were better handling, what cars were faster, what cars could make moves. When they were in the little train that they were doing where the cars really couldn't make moves, you saw Chase Elliott make a move. You saw Ross Chastain make a move, and that's something that you don't really see at Daytona Talladega as much lately, maybe a little bit more this year with the new car, but it was fun to watch that. It was fun to have a group of cars that were faster. You had Chastain up there. You had Elliott. They were the fastest cars. Denny Hamlin was one of the fastest cars till Chastain took him out. And then, of course, Martin Truex Jr. going for his first ever Super Speedway race. He doesn't have the best luck at those. Super Speedway win. Doesn't have the best luck at those type of races. Was one of the fastest cars as well. So about those 4 or 5 cars were really fast. They were the cars that were going to be running up front the entire race. And you saw that. They were able to make moves. And Chastain really couldn't do a whole lot. He might have even been better than Elliott, the car was. But with all the damage he had on the front of the car with the tape, that definitely hurt aerodynamically. When you get the lead, you can run behind the driver with that tape and that the messed up front of the car. But obviously, when you take the lead, it's a major disadvantage to him. And then, of course, the 7. At the end of the race, all of a sudden, Corey LaJoie gets up in there, and he can run with them. He was making good moves. He was driving really well. Looked like a veteran out there, making right moves. And then, of course, unfortunately, on the final lap, that did not work out for him. Now, let's talk about I got to bring this up because this is obviously a main talk or main point of concern leaving Atlanta going into the next race is Ross Chastain. And I do want to talk about it because it's important. It's a top thing to talk about right now. Ross Chastain is one of the most popular drivers in NASCAR at the moment. He's getting all the talk. All the conversation is around him. I talk to people who don't watch NASCAR. They ask me how Ross Chastain did. So that's certainly interesting. And it's because he's creating storylines. He's aggressive. He has a very aggressive driving style. Kind of makes me think about Ty Gibbs a little bit. Ty Gibbs may even be a little bit more conservative in the Xfinity Series than Ross Chastain. But Ross does have to learn how to control it. There are a few aspects that's going to cost him in the future or this season. Chastain is, I know this is his first year winning a race, but he is borderline championship favorite. Obviously, you have to go with Chase Elliott for the championship favorite with more playoff points, higher in the standings, 3 wins, the most wins, by the way, for Chase Elliott. But Chastain's right behind that. Chastain is the next guy. He is the next championship favorite. I think running into Denny Hamlin and running into Chase Elliott and running into Martin Truex Jr. Definitely debunks that a little bit. If he's running for a playoff spot or for a playoff position or for a race win that could put him into a championship race or a next round of the playoffs, and you're racing a guy like Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex Jr., Chase Elliott, a long list of guys that he's had run-ins with, they'll race you differently. They might race you a little bit harder. They might not be afraid to knock you out the way early on in the race, even for a stage win or something. It's multiple things like that. Or this could go down to just a playoff point. Maybe Denny Hamlin needs to get in, or maybe you need to get in with just 1 point, which we see every year occur almost in the playoffs. And then he could get knocked out of the way or ultimately wrecked when it's needed. I think it's going to be a rough playoff run for Ross Chastain because he's running into drivers unnecessarily. If that was for the win, I think we'd be talking about something completely different. But that was with, I believe it was just under 10 laps to go. If he had to let off the gas in that instance when he essentially wrecked Denny Hamlin, or earlier on in the race when he essentially wrecked Martin Truex Jr., he could have let off the gas. He might have lost a little momentum, might even have lost a couple positions, but it still would have had a chance to win. Now, instead of that, he now has drivers mad at him and still a chance to win, but it's just frustrating to watch. I hate it. I hate that for him. And then he also gets on the radio. I think he needs to maybe, obviously he's apologizing for it. He knows that's not what you need to do. At the same time, maybe be a little more aggressive. Try to be a little bit more intimidating if you're Ross Chastain. He doesn't have an intimidating personality just based off what he says in his interviews after the St. Louis incident. Instead of getting out the car and apologizing to everybody, maybe he should have said, you should have got out my way. I run behind you for 30 laps. That's kind of how I see it. Maybe kind of stand up for yourself a little bit in your interviews and become that intimidating figure instead of that figure that just kind of wrecks guys. So I think that's an interesting topic. That's just my opinion on it. Leave a comment down if you disagree or agree or have comments about that situation. It's definitely a controversial topic. It's definitely something to talk about, though, which is good. That's why we like Ross being in the sport. He's good for the sport. He gives us all a lot to talk about. I do want to look at the top 10 just really quick. We had Chase Elliott win. Chastain finished second. Austin Cindric finished third. Eric Jones finished fourth. Eric Jones was having a really decent run. Wasn't really the fastest car, but if you do remember at the last super speedway style race that we had back in Talladega, Eric Jones was really fast. That obviously came into play today, why he got a decent finish. Ryan Blaney finishing fifth. He actually adds to his points cushion. He's currently 131 above. That's not bad. You want to stay ahead of Truex. You want to stay in that 14th spot if you're Ryan Blaney, so getting a good finish today helps with that. Suarez, Justin Haley, not a bad run for him. Anytime he's in the top 10, that's a good run for that team. I've mentioned his name a few times this season at multiple variety of different racetracks. Eric Almirola. Did anybody else catch at the beginning of the race where I believe it was Rick Allen said Eric Almirola might not retire? I just heard that. I caught that. I don't know if there's something he knows that we don't know. I haven't heard anything about that until recently, but that's definitely interesting. Finishing 8th at his supposedly final race at Atlanta. Cole Custer 9th, and then Harrison Burton, who was running up front at times, and pit cycles would go through and stuff, finished in the 10th position. Let's go through the playoffs points as well. Like I said, Austin Cindric is the lowest guy with the win, but essentially he is in with that win. He does have Ryan Blaney, obviously finished in the top 5 today, adds to his point cushion. I think if you're Ryan Blaney, you want to stay ahead of Truex in case we do get 2 more surprise winners, which is 100% possible this season. So if you're Blaney, you definitely want to keep that decent points cushion, which he has at over a 60-point lead over Martin Truex Jr. 131 points for Ryan Blaney, above the cut line as of now. Martin Truex Jr. 62 points above. Like I said, that's pretty comfortable. That's comfortable if you don't have any more new winners. If you start having more new winners, that definitely tightens up a little bit. Christopher Bell. Like I said, if you're Christopher Bell, I think you need to be trying to get ahead of Truex here. Not a good day for Christopher Bell. Was running pretty decent, having a decent run, and then had some tire failures, spun out, comes down pit road, loses a tire on pit road, ended up not getting a good finish at all for Christopher Bell. He's had a rough couple of weeks now, Christopher Bell has, so that's unfortunate for him. Kevin Harvick, didn't even really know Kevin Harvick was in the race today. Didn't talk about him a whole lot. He did end up finishing 12th, which is not terrible, but wasn't really the fastest car, not the best handling car. Wasn't able to come up front and give it a shot for the win. He's definitely still close. He can get into the playoffs through points if there are no new winners. But I think if you're Kevin Harvick, you need to try to be focusing on winning a race. Same thing with Almirola now. That shift starts to focus from points to winning. Austin Dillon, Eric Jones, obviously that point of concern now needs to be to get a win to get in the playoffs, and they have a few opportunities to do so, and they'll try everything they can to get those wins, obviously. So that's interesting. I do want to say we do go to New Hampshire next week, one of my favorite racetracks on the schedule. I really like New Hampshire. It's a mile track. It races like a short track, or at least it has in the past. Kind of maybe similar to St. Louis a little bit. Definitely every track has their similarities and differences, so it could be a pretty good race. I think New Hampshire should be a really fun race to watch, so tune in for that video, obviously. I do also want to say, today at Atlanta was the first repeat race that we've had all season. What I mean by that is this is the second race at Atlanta with the next-gen car. This is the first racetrack that's had 2 races with the next-gen car. Now, we're going to go through the rest of the summer portion of the schedule without any repeat racetracks, without racing the second race. But when we get into the playoffs, we go to Texas, we go to Kansas, we go to Las Vegas. Very important racetracks. We could see some guys maybe figuring some things out. We saw today drivers look at this race and say, hey, back in March, this was our problem. We were able to fix that and run faster today in the summer race here at Atlanta. I think you could see that continue on into the playoffs when we go to repeat racetracks, and at the end of the regular season, Darlington, obviously, the playoff opener. Richmond's another example of that. So I think you're going to start to see that now. Obviously, you'll see that next year, but you're going to start to see that start to kind of move over, that shift from this is brand new, this is the first time we've ever done this, to we can take notes from the first race at this track. Just thought that was interesting and needed to be brought up. Like I said, that's all there is to talk about after I tried to get into all of it at least, after a action-packed, wild race at Atlanta Motor Speedway. A pretty good, one of the funnest races I've had watching this season at Atlanta. So it was fun. Like I said, tune in next week for my race review after New Hampshire. And that's it. That's all there is to talk about. If you're not first, you're last. And of course, let's get rowdy.